Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the newly established Parliament of Saudi Arabia. I hope I should not repeat the motion because it's so lengthy. So with no further delay, I'd like to explain today, first, what is the problem in the status quo? Secondly, by what mechanism are we going to tackle that problem? And then we'll explain to you why this is important, why we are authorized to do so, and what benefits it will bring in turn. With no further delay, Mr. Speaker, today there are countries that do not cooperate with our fight on terror. Saudi Arabia has suffered greatly from terror. We had to extradite bin Laden from our country. We suffer from numerous terrorist attacks on behalf of hardline Muslims. Yet there are Muslim countries who enjoy the freedom, whose citizens enjoy the freedom to come to our territory, to enjoy our hospitality, yet their democratically elected governments cover up for Al-Qaeda, Taliban and other terrorist organizations that constitute a serious threat to our country. Mr. Speaker, the situation is that, for example, Pakistan does not intervene into its northwestern territories that are basically controlled by Taliban, by Pushtun leaders, Taliban and Al-Qaeda, because first, America finances Pakistan's military. If Pakistan's military deals with that problem, America will stop financing it. So it's within Pakistan's national interest to continue covering up for Al-Qaeda. We believe that this is intolerable and we should stop it by using the following model. Until Pakistan, as we believe, as we judge, starts to cooperate on terrorism, starts fighting terrorism in those territories, starts fighting Al-Qaeda and Taliban in those territories, we will not let Pakistanis and Afghani people, whose government also tries to cover up for Taliban and Al-Qaeda, to perform Hajj. How exactly this will work, Mr. Speaker? Well, it is a well-known fact that Hajj is the sacred need for every single Muslim. So every single Muslim wants to commit Hajj. We believe that by imposing that limitation, we will make people of those countries, of Pakistan and Afghanistan, voice it to their governments. Their governments, for fear of people disagreeing with that, for fear of people protesting against that, will start to cooperate on terrorism issues, will start to comply with their obligations, with what they're getting money for, will start to fight against terrorism. So, Mr. Speaker, today, no thank you. Mr. Speaker, today we're going to be talking about the following important issues. First, how it will work. Secondly, why we are authorized to do this for Saudi Arabia's security's sake. No thank you, later. And thirdly, we will explain you what an important message it will send, how it will distance basically Islam from terrorism, how it will send the right kind of message. Let's tackle it one by one. So I have explained to you basically that by creating this kind of anxiety among Muslims in the respective countries, we will push their governments for fear of uprising, for fear of revolt against their policies, to comply with their obligations. The opposition might say that, okay, we will have such a huge influx of terrorists in those countries. People will see that they are denied their right to go to Mecca, and they will go to terrorist organizations instead. Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is exactly the second mechanism how this will work. Afghani and Pakistani governments now think that they control those networks because they are limited to certain territories and small. If there will be massive influx, for the same fear of this massive influx, Pakistani and Afghani governments will start to comply with their obligations in fighting terrorism. Why we are authorized to do so, ladies and gentlemen? Saudi Arabia is one of the sufferers in the fight with terrorism. We had terrorist attacks against Riyadh, we had terrorist attacks in many cities in our eastern province. We believe that in order to protect our own territory, our own citizens, we have to build this kind of we have to use the very fact that we are in custody of the holiest place to all Muslims, we should use it as a tool to fight against terrorism that is completely against Islam and against our country. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, if Afghanistan and Pakistan keep covering for terrorists, there is a possibility that those terrorists might be disguised as people who come to Hajj, might infiltrate to our country and commit something completely outrageous during that Hajj. We cannot tolerate that situation. We cannot tolerate the situation when two countries their citizens enjoy the right to come to our country, yet they pose at the same time great threat to our national security. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we should send the message that we distance Islam from terrorism. Before that, the fight against terrorism has been mostly conducted by Western countries, by Christian countries. So this gives terrorists the kind of impression that this is a kind of clash of civilizations, this is a new crusade against Islam. No. For the first time in history, a Muslim country, Saudi Arabia, has to send a clear message. And the country that actually is a custodian, in custody, yes.
Alright, okay, the reason why Riyadh was attacked in terrorist attacks is because it has shown to cooperate with the Western agenda of anti-terrorism. Wouldn't you actually feel that rhetoric and therefore increase attacks?
Yes. Sir, I told you again, this is not the Western fight against terrorism, it's our own fight against terrorism, because we're threatened as well. We have lots of extremists in Saudi Arabia. We have to send a clear signal to all people, to all Muslims around the world, that people who are in custody of the two holiest places for all Muslims are against terrorism, that we support this fight and we will never fade away from those problems. This doesn't mean that we discriminate in any way against Muslims. We only say that governments of respective countries whose citizens enjoy this right to come to our territory and to touch the sacred places for Muslims should comply with our own common fight against the terrorism. Mr. Speaker, today we told you how this tool will work in achieving the goal, why we're authorized to do so, and what kind of message it will send to the international community, to followers of Islam all around the world. Thank you very much. We're proud to be with you.
Okay, thank you very much. The clash of the opposition is clear. Obviously, war on terror is very important, and we should do many things as possible to crack down on Al-Qaeda and to make sure that no more US citizens are killed. But, and also secondly, we accept that this act of going to, this practice of going Hajj and Um-rah, going to Mecca, is extremely important. The proposition says, because it's important, it will be effective. We say on the opposition, because it's so important, that fundamental right should not be infringed by any government, ladies and gentlemen. Now, so pretty much we're going to tell you how this right is very important. And secondly, we're going to talk about how this policy is counterproductive. Firstly, in the case of creating antipathy and further violence. But secondly, how the international community would lose Saudi Arabia, which is a unique actor which is mediating the West and these Middle Eastern countries. So that's our signpost. But before that, let me engage with Max. Actually, this was my first time to debate with Max, and I have to say that he had many signposts, but was incredibly thin on the ground. Firstly, he said that Saudi Arabia should be authorized to do this because Saudi Arabia was attacked by terrorists. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly we say, yes, they were attacked. But this, we would prove on the opposition, this policy would exacerbate that situation further. More people in Saudi Arabia would die, and therefore that principle should not be applied. Secondly, just because there are social disorder does not necessarily mean that the government can infringe the fundamental right of people. Just because there are cases of murder, just because there are some people who spread gas on the subway, does not mean that you can infringe cults, or you cannot infringe the fundamental right of being able to practice your religion. So just because there are some harm doesn't mean government can do whatever they want. Second big point of rebuttal is about effectiveness. The premise of PM is that this policy is effective. We say, ladies and gentlemen, on the opposition, that it is not. Firstly, we say, no, thank you. Firstly, we say, in terms of approach to terrorism, Our stance of the opposition is that we should crack down on terrorism. We should keep fighting against Al-Qaeda. And we should keep funding Pakistani government to make sure that Pakistani government is doing, to some extent, cooperating to the United States. And we are weakening the power of Al-Qaeda and in the Middle East. We think this is can happen in exactly the same way how terrorist organization called ETA in Basque Spain was cracked down by Spanish government. We never really backed off by negotiating. We think that this approach can work. Secondly, we say these Al-Qaeda would move to non-Islamic states in order to operate. Like going to maybe Southeast Asian countries in order to operate. So even if this policy incentivizes these Muslims, this Al-Qaeda would change their place and still continue to smuggle these trade arms and drugs to make money. Thirdly, we say the premise of the PM is that if people fear, that fear would transcend to government's policy, right? We say, ladies and gentlemen, that is not true, because not many Pakistani actually know that the Pakistani government is actively supporting these people. And even if people demand, people protest, government can crack down on these protests and rallies. So even if people demand, it does not necessarily mean that the government would change their policy. So let's talk about our positive material. Firstly, religious freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that Um-rah and Hajj is just too important for any government to take that away. We think that religious freedom is very important. And the reason is because it's necessary for your pursuit of meaningful life. Religion, especially Islam, belief of Islam for these Muslims are fundamental. It's the basis of their beliefs, basis of their morality and ethical code. All of these Sharia courts are placed in Saudi Arabia. All of these punishments, all of these social policies are based on these Islamic beliefs. Religion is an extremely important thing for these people. No, thank you. And like just to imagine, many Christian people go to churches every day, or these people who practice Um-rah and Hajj, they sell their entire land or cattle to go to that place, to earn money to go to that place. We can see how this is extremely important, or how people choose to die to protect their religious freedom. Religious freedom is very important. And committing bad things is not a reason to take that right away. Because we give religious freedom to prisoners, for example. Even if we're talking about rapists, even if we're talking about murderers who have intentionally killed innocent people, that religious freedom is protected by liberal societies. We think that religious freedom should be protected. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take you later, this policy involves innocent people. Those Pakistanis, vast majority of 99% of Pakistanis living in Pakistan, who are not cooperating to terrorists, who are not giving money to Al-Qaeda, those religious freedom would also be infringed. Where is the legitimacy for the proposition to infringe these innocent people's fundamental right? I have to hear an answer from that.
We do not infringe upon people's right to preach Islam. We only deny them the right to enter our country, which we already do in the status quo for people whom we deem dangerous.
You are denying access to this Mecca, which is the core part of Islamic belief. The reason why your policy is effective, or as you say, is because it's an important practice. Denying Um-rah, denying Hajj means denying Muslims, denying Islamic belief, denying their entire life and their entire morality. No, thank you. No, it's true. Secondly, this policy is counterproductive. Ladies and gentlemen, as Max told us, like Max gave his logic in his speech, we think this policy is counterproductive because it creates antipathy amongst Muslims, ladies and gentlemen. But not only that, Al-Qaeda can use this rhetoric that Saudi Arabia infringed their right, and therefore we should commit more suicide bombings, or collect more money, collect more people, and attack Saudi Arabian government. But secondly, like Matt said, Saudi Arabia is doing it, not the West. The problem is, not many people see that way. People see Saudi Arabia as an Arabic country which is extremely friendly to the United States. That's why there are U.S. bases, I think, in Saudi Arabia, I'm not sure, or how Obama is constantly meeting with the king of Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia is historically deeply connected to the West, antipathy to Saudi Arabia means antipathy to the West. So there will be more possibility of terrorist attacks, more prolonging war near Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we think that's incredibly damaging. For all these reasons, we're proud to oppose.
Gentlemen, this is the Deputy Prime Minister of the Arabic Parliamentary speaking. We would like to address what the opening opposition. What we'd like to restate first in our stance in this case. We believe that the war on terror is of paramount importance, as it is acknowledged by the opening opposition themselves. And I believe that because of this, and because Saudi Arabia holds the power to do so, to effectively combat terrorism and Al-Qaeda, as my partner have told you, we believe that we should take this plan. Addressing the first argument from the opening opposition is that they say that it is a fundamental right of people, that is religious freedom. Okay, true, people have religious freedom, but most importantly is that this is not even a permanent thing. What we want to achieve here is that we want to combat Al-Qaeda as quickly and efficiently as possible, so that when it is over, when all is said and done, Pakistanis and Afghans people will be able to go to Mecca again for their Hajj, which is why this is a very important drive to deal with, to dispose of Al-Qaeda as soon as possible, simply because it is that important of a right that they want to achieve it as soon as possible. That is the first point. Now secondly, they say that Saudi Arabia, we do not have the right to actually decline anybody to come to Mecca because it is like the fundamental right thing and such. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that Al-Qaeda, the terrorism, is against the interest of Islam and therefore against the interest of Saudi Arabia as the most center, most authority, greatest authority on Islamic people. And therefore, if this goes against Saudi Arabia's policy, if this goes against Saudi Arabia's government and the greater Islamic good, we believe that Saudi Arabia totally has the right to deny access to the territory. We call this sovereignty. We call this the very right of every country to actually deny access to their country of everybody who do not fulfill the criteria. So if they are not Islamic with a good conduct, if they are not Islamic people with a reputation, or if they are coming to Saudi Arabia, raise the reputation of Islam, and by extension Saudi Arabia, we believe that Saudi Arabia, in the interest of Islam and Saudi Arabia themselves, just have the right to actually decline the access to the territory. Before moving on to my third reputation, yes.
Where is the sovereignty of Saudi Arabia to infringe the fundamental right of innocent people living in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or even UAE?
Ladies and gentlemen, okay. When we talk about Saudi Arabia, and we talk about sovereignty, we say that, okay, Mecca is a part of Saudi Arabia. It is the ultimate goal of the Islamic people to actually go to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, which is Saudi Arabia's land. We believe that therefore Saudi Arabia, as the owner of the Mecca, the territory, we believe that they have the ultimate right, the ultimate motivation, and to uphold this reputation of Mecca themselves. When you talk about innocent people of Afghan and so on, if they really want that much to go to Mecca, is all more the reason why they should urge the government to actually overthrow Al-Qaeda as bases in their country so that they can go to the country. We believe that this justifies the means. Now, on to the third reputation, which is the effectiveness, ladies and gentlemen. The effectiveness that the opening opposition said is that it is not going to be effective because there is not enough traffic and so on. But ladies and gentlemen, if they have been paying the slightest attention to the Prime Minister of the Saudi Arabic Parliament here, we believe that first, we have proven how this will be effective both on the drive to do so by giving the urge to the many, millions of hundreds of millions of people in Pakistan to actually start urging the government, to actually start claiming their right to go to Mecca, therefore effectively urging the government to stop covering blanketing for the Al-Qaeda bases. We believe that this is effective on the urge point. And moreover, this is effective on combating the very image of Islamic and terrorism itself, because Islamic country is the one who takes the initiative, takes the action to actually disassociate Islam from terrorism. We believe that this is effective more so than the combat of Western countries trying to combat terrorism, because that does not disassociate Islamic from terrorism at all. What can disassociate them is when we give a clear message that Islamic country, Saudi Arabia, the most authority in the Islamic country, says no to terrorism, says no to Al-Qaeda, and that is when the terrorism will be clearly just separated from Islamic, and therefore the war on terror with this mechanism is effective in more than one way. So finally, on the last argument of the opening opposition, they say that Al-Qaeda will just move to another country, they'll just move to South Asia, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, the beauty of our proposal today is that it is exclusively impossible for Al-Qaeda to go to other countries. We need to first be reminded that Al-Qaeda is also an Islamic-based, albeit-based, fundamentalist organization. And other countries which do not have an Islamic population will not accept them. Why would they cover for Al-Qaeda, for example? They are not even Islamic. So they can only move to a country where there's a majority of Islamic population. And okay, if they're moving to a country with this major Islamic population, do you think that after this plan, those countries will cover for Al-Qaeda too? No. This is effective not only in Pakistan or in Afghanistan, but also even if they move to Indonesia. Hello. If they move to Indonesia, they will also not be able to settle a base, and Indonesia will have no incentive whatsoever to cover for Al-Qaeda, simply because the most of the population actually wants to go to Mecca, actually wants to go to Saudi Arabia, which is why, effectively, Al-Qaeda will have no place to flee, will have no government to cover them, simply because the only place they can flee to is where the people, the citizens themselves, will urge the government to actually take care of them. So this is why, ultimately, the beauty of argument today is that this plan will totally make Al-Qaeda helpless. Now on to my extension of my argument. Well, first, I believe that my partner has told you about how we, Saudi Arabia, has motivation and the justification in doing so, because one, we are totally upholding our territory, and two, it goes along with our interests and along with Islamic people from throughout the world who are suffering from the stereotype, who are suffering from the image of the association of Islamic with terrorism. We believe that this goes for the right of every single Islamic people throughout the world who are currently suffering from the stereotype. And therefore, for that purpose, Saudi Arabia has fully have the justification and fully have the motivation to do so, to protect Islamic people from very first place. Secondly, we have talked about the importance of Mecca itself, and that the opposition agrees. So the drive that overwhelms the current government of Pakistan can be analyzed in two ways, as my partner have told you. I'm going to restate this, I'm going to elaborate it. The first is that if the people of Pakistan have the urge to go to Mecca, and they know that they're denied access of Mecca simply because the country is sheltering the Al-Qaeda, then we first start to raise a riot saying to the government that, no, we want to overthrow Al-Qaeda. We don't want you to cover for Al-Qaeda, because that will ultimately make all of us go to hell. All Islamic people cannot go to Mecca. Go to hell. Then ultimately, harm the lives of millions of people, and therefore I believe that that is the sheer force that can single-handedly make Pakistan deal with the Al-Qaeda. That cannot be achieved by monetary help of military, especially when they do not have the incentive to do so in the first place, because they get money from the United States, and apparently they will keep getting money if they do not get rid of Al-Qaeda. So therefore, and even if you say that the people will start going to Al-Qaeda instead, we say that the government still have plenty of incentive to not make Al-Qaeda too powerful, to overthrow them. For all those grounds, we believe that we have given a sufficient reason why we should take this proposal, and therefore we proudly propose this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The key in this debate is the neutrality of Saudi Arabia, or at least the perceived neutrality of Saudi Arabia amongst the Arab world. When you lose that neutrality, we think there is going to be increased threats towards Saudi Arabia, contrary to what they say. And as a result, we think the United States and the Western world is going to lose a very important keystone in regional stability. Ladies and gentlemen, we think it is not something we should actually risk, and therefore the motion just falls. Now, there are 2 points of rebuttal, and then I'll move on to two substantive things I'm going to discuss. Firstly, I'm going to discuss, first point of rebuttal is to the argument about how we have to say that Saudi Arabia symbolically tackles terrorism, and secondly about the importance of religion. The two positive matters are, one, I'm going to talk about security and threats towards Saudi Arabia, and lastly about losing credibility. So the first point of rebuttal is about this, how Islam suffer credibility, and therefore Saudi Arabia generally has to act in this case. Now, we would say that their proposal is fundamentally to associate every innocent citizen to be terrorists, ladies and gentlemen, because they're not only banning the access to Mecca to terrorists themselves, they're involving everybody else. Now, the important thing to recognize is that maybe in places like Al-Qaeda might be actually cracked down to some extent, but what we would say is that there will be other groups, other terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Al-Shabaab operating definitely, ladies and gentlemen, and they will continue to use this rhetoric to actually to get people on the ground to support them, saying that now the West is actually supporting every single citizen on the ground a terrorist just because you look Muslim, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is going to be counterproductive to this extent. The second point of rebuttal is about the importance of religion. Now, they have told us that the importance of religion is not important because, firstly, Saudi Arabia has its sovereignty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Qaeda already asked you why that sovereignty should be extended to infringing the fundamental right religion to other nations, like Pakistan, noted down, everybody else. And moreover, ladies and gentlemen, we don't really think that even in places like Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, like people are going to, like Al-Qaeda is going to be ousted, ladies and gentlemen, because even though like the Pakistani government is going to crack down on it, what's going to happen, noted down, is that Al-Qaeda is probably going to stay. If you analyze the nations where Al-Qaeda stays, they rely on tribal systems, ladies and gentlemen, and the tribal leaders are likely to be still in support of Al-Qaeda because that gives them power, it gives them weapons in order to make their tribe stronger than others, ladies and gentlemen. It provides stability, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that like Al-Qaeda is not going to be ousted, and what's going to happen is a continuation of oppression of these people's rights because they still have Al-Qaeda operating, and that's therefore like they can't access Mecca. We think that is tremendously important. So let's move on to the first point, which is about threats. Now, it's important to understand that in the first place, threats towards Saudi Arabia right now is not that large. They pointed to one example of threat to Riyadh, noted down. But the thing is, they get less terrorism than any other nation around the world. Why? Because they're seen as relatively ideologically neutral. I'm going to extend on this later on. But the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, on top of that, in terms of effectiveness, they said that Al-Qaeda is going to be cracked down, and therefore like citizens will vote against Al-Qaeda. Important thing to recognize here is that terrorism does not only happen because of the reason of religion, ladies and gentlemen. It's related to like nationality to some extent in terms of like conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, ladies and gentlemen. On top of that, like we told you how like regional powers, local powers, like tribal leaders are going to be supporting them for the sake of stability. So we don't really think that stability, like cracking down on these groups are going to stand. And on top of that, we think that when you say that every terrorist is, every Muslim person, even though you look innocent, is a potential terrorist, we think Hezbollah and other actors are going to pick up the place and actually move on to enhancing the terrorist rhetoric. We think terrorists are going to be strengthened by taking this proposal. Entire point explained by Peter, not really given much response. Yes, sir.
Well, we'll deal with Hezbollah by imposing same sanctions on Lebanon. But more importantly, we managed to expel Bin Laden from Saudi Arabia, despite him being Saudi Arabian citizen. We managed to deal with its network and organization. Why Pakistan cannot deal with it?
Now, the thing is, Saudi Arabia is not a tribal system like in Pakistan it is, and that's why we think that there's a huge distinction here. And ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the first point, which we are going to tell you, is about the credibility of Saudi Arabia. So right now, ladies and gentlemen, Saudi Arabia is an important mediator in terms of the Western interests and Arabic interests. Why do they actually pursue this line? Because they think it gives us stability and security, because they can be both friends with the United States and other Arabic stations as well. So what's going to happen, first of all, when you think that when they think that this is possibly going to increase security, is that they're going to give up supporting the Western needs, which is the Western aims, which is to track down terrorists. So the US is going to lose that important linchpin, ladies and gentlemen. And on top of that, if people think that Saudi Arabia is a tool of Western government and therefore loses its credibility, what's going to happen is that you lose effective diplomatic tools. Like Saudi Arabia plays an important role in providing things like amnesty and hosting negotiations in nations like Yemen and Tunisia, giving amnesty to past dictators which have been ousted due to Arab Spring. Ladies and gentlemen, when they lose credibility because they're seen as a Western tool, they lose these kind of things, and conflicts there are just going to be prolonged. We think this is tremendously bad. So why do we think that Saudi Arabia is now seen as neutral? Now, government may say that they cooperate. They say that they cooperate with the war on terror right now, ladies and gentlemen. But the reality is, whether the people in Afghanistan, whether the people all around the Arab world believe in that kind of things, it depends on how the Saudi Arabian government acts, ladies and gentlemen. In the status quo, they have Sharia courts, they have all Islamic order, and therefore people are likely to believe in the neutrality, ladies and gentlemen. When it takes a more and more active role in actually saying that all potential people are terrorists, they get seen as equivalent to the United States, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is very bad. So at the end of the day, we don't really think that losing the neutrality of Saudi Arabia and an important actor in this region is a good thing, is a very wise step for us to take, especially when we think that people on the ground are going to associate Saudi Arabia with the foreign policies of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this motion just can't stand. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that this war on like Al-Qaeda, because of Al-Qaeda, hundreds of thousands of people are suffering. Mr. Speaker, when these Osama bin Laden can live near the governmental facility of Pakistan for more than 10 years, when the citizens of Afghanistan is indirectly supporting Al-Qaeda as a result of this, creating massive obstacles to successful war on terror, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some new measures have to be taken. We view this proposal as the most effective way to end this conflict as quickly as possible and the most effective way to save the people, and that is the reason we are very proud to propose. So what I'm going to do is very clear. First, I'm going to engage with what the opposition side said. Now, secondly, I'm going to look at this issue about freedom of religion, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to compare the right we are trying to protect and right they are trying to protect, Mr. Speaker. Now, thirdly, I'm going to explain how this proposal is a very effective way of tackling Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker. Opening government side did a very good job in expressing how this proposal is an effective way. I'm going to further specifically explain how this is a very effective way of winning the war. Now, before that response, Mr. Speaker, first of all, first speaker from the opening opposition said, well, Mr. Speaker, all we have to do is to further crack down on Al-Qaeda. That's how we fix the problem in Basque, Mr. Speaker. The question here is how do we do that, Mr. Speaker? We have been doing for more than 10 years, and yet there is no end to this kind of conflict, Mr. Speaker. They raised the example Basque, Mr. Speaker, but that's a completely different issue, Mr. Speaker, in terms of depth of the issue and complexity, Mr. Speaker. Actually, the example Basque actually supports our side, right? The reason why the ETA was dismantled was because, after all, ETA lost the support from citizens and others who fed up with the violence that the ETA was using, Mr. Speaker. So we believe that winning the heart and mind of citizens by taking this proposal, or by reducing the support for Al-Qaeda from citizens, is the most effective way to tackle this proposal, and that's what we are proposing, Mr. Speaker. Now, secondly, about the issue of Saudi Arabia, Mr. Speaker. First of all, we do not think Saudi Arabia is a tool of West, Mr. Speaker. It's true that the US base is located in Saudi Arabia, but that is only for strategic reasons, Mr. Speaker. And they talk as if Saudi Arabia is on the side of West. That is not the case, Mr. Speaker. There are many issues that West and Saudi Arabia disagree over, Mr. Speaker. For example, like issue regarding women's rights, Mr. Speaker. Or, Mr. Speaker, Saudi Arabia is a top of Arabic nation. We do not think that people will perceive Saudi Arabia as a tool of West, Mr. Speaker. Now, secondly, they say yes. They say by taking this proposal, new association between West and Arabic nation is going to be created. We do not think so, Mr. Speaker. We believe this is the action of Saudi Arabia to defend itself from the terrorist activity. This is the action of Saudi Arabia to protect the rights of Muslim people, as I'm going to explain, Mr. Speaker. We do not think that Western society, people on the ground, is going to suddenly think that West, Saudi Arabia is on the side of West, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, their argument does not stand. Now, finally, about the issue of tribe, Hezbollah, kind of irrelevant, but Mr. Speaker, the issue about tribal, Mr. Speaker. They say this proposal somehow increase the support of tribal support to Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker. First of all, this argument is entirely predicated upon this assumption that after an election, Saudi Arabia will be seen as West, Mr. Speaker, which is the case. Now, secondly, Mr. Speaker, we will cutting the tie between tribe and Al-Qaeda is the very thing we are trying to do, right? By sending a message that Al-Qaeda does not represent Muslims, Mr. Speaker, we are going to cut the tie between tribal groups which are providing support for Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker. That's why, Mr. Speaker, as they have explained, this is the most effective way to tackle this issue, Mr. Speaker. Now, moving on to my first issue about freedom of religion. Now, Mr. Speaker, today's government side, opposition side, says freedom of religion is fundamental. Therefore, we have to protect it. We already agree that freedom of religion is important. But, Mr. Speaker, we all know that society is not so simple, Mr. Speaker. We always have to compare the right we are trying to protect and right we are going to restrict, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe our side protect more rights. Let me explain the reason, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, extensive restriction is not so huge, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a practice that you have to do once in your life, meaning that if we bring this conflict to quick end, Mr. Speaker, many people's freedom of religion will still be reserved. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, what is important is what is the situation on the ground, Mr. Speaker. Now, there is an ongoing conflict in Afghanistan, meaning that there are also a huge number of people in Afghanistan and Pakistan who are prevented from fulfilling this religious duty, Mr. Speaker. That's why, so Mr. Speaker, even under the CSO, the religious freedom is restricted, limited, Mr. Speaker. So by bringing quick end to this, Mr. Speaker, we can restore their right to religious freedom. Now thirdly, Mr. Speaker, what is more important is fundamental right, Mr. Speaker. We are, because of this ongoing conflict, right? Right to live. What is the most fundamental thing? To being under threat, right, Mr. Speaker? And this right to live is of course the foundation of right to religious freedom, because without being able to live, you cannot practice your religion, Mr. Speaker. What is happening in Afghanistan is hundreds and thousands of people killed by the conflict. Women are repressed, Mr. Speaker. We believe this proposal is, our side, protect more rights, Mr. Speaker. Now, thirdly, Mr. Speaker, as for the region that is controlled by Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker, also, these Al-Qaeda, also another form of religious freedom religion is violated, Mr. Speaker, because these Al-Qaeda, which believe in the strict code of Muslim, are imposing their own view of Muslim onto the people who within the region, Mr. Speaker. That's how freedom religion is also restricted, Mr. Speaker. So what we would like to say is that we are trying to protect more rights by taking this proposal down our side, Mr. Speaker. Now, finally, about the issue of how this proposal is the most effective way of, cutting support for terrorist organizations, Mr. Speaker. Opening side mainly focused on the issue of how this proposal reduces support for the government. I'm going to further explain that before that.
Okay, Hajj is an important part of religion that is going to be protected anyway, regardless of how strict Islamism is under the rule of Al-Qaeda. You're denying it altogether.
No, we are not saying that. We are trying to restore the very rights we are trying to protect, Mr. Speaker. As I've already explained, break it down. Now, moving on to the first point, they mainly talk about the citizen support for the government. But Mr. Speaker, there is much more benefit, Mr. Speaker. For example, on the ground, what is happening under status quo is basically citizens are giving indirect support to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker. They are providing the place to hide. They are sometimes providing weapons, Mr. Speaker. They are telling lies to the Western forces, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, by taking this proposal, by distancing, Al-Qaeda and citizens, Mr. Speaker, we can much better we can much better fight the war against Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker. Now, secondly, Mr. Speaker, as I already explained, this proposal basically cut the tie between tribal group, which is providing vital support, and Al-Qaeda. That is another reason why this proposal is the most effective way. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, this proposal reduces the antipathy of the West toward Muslim world. And Mr. Speaker, because this proposal basically sends a message to the Western world that Muslim is not actually terrorist, Mr. Speaker, and as a result of this, by showing that the Muslims are not terrorists, Mr. Speaker, Muslim also against terrorist organization, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the Western antipathy towards the Muslim world will be decreased. Why this is good? Because the Western antipathy is the very thing that Al-Qaeda is capitalizing on to get support from citizens, right? By reducing the antipathy from the West toward, Muslims, Mr. Speaker, we can reduce the support, we can reduce, Al-Qaeda power, and that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, this proposal is the most effective way to fight the war.
Ladies and gentlemen, Muslim is universal religion, and it prohibits the discrimination according to races or ethnicities, ladies and gentlemen. But this proposal, because of Saudi Arabia's such as selfish needs, actually they suddenly prohibit the certain fundamental rights of the people of a certain ethnicity. And we believe that it is totally betrayal of Muslim itself, and it caused a lot of anger among Muslims entire the world. And we believe that it's not only threaten the security of Saudi Arabia, rather, but also it will diminish the Saudi Arabia power as a representative of Muslims. So we beg to oppose. First, let me refute what the speaker has said. But ladies and gentlemen, entire assumption of government side is incentive of government would solve everything, ladies and gentlemen. But it's not so simple, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, anyway, to Al-Qaeda, yes, US, the strongest force of the world, is fighting in Afghanistan for a long time, 10 years, but still they cannot diminish that. That fact that not only incentive, but also capacity of army is also a problem, and that incentive do not solve the problem entirely, ladies and gentlemen. And especially in case of Afghanistan, the difficult mosaic of races or ethnicity of clans, and it makes difficult cooperation within the country. And moreover, well, that the poor finance of the army itself makes it difficult to attack nothing, Al-Qaeda or so forth. Just incentivizing government do not solve anything, because there's many problems alongside that, ladies and gentlemen. Besides, we believe that even though citizens get anger or so forth, but still that anger itself would go to the Saudi Arabian government, not to the Afghanistan government, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, it is easy to imagine that rather Pakistani government not try to spend a lot of money to cracking down Al-Qaeda, rather try to overturn Saudi Arabian decision or so, ladies and gentlemen. It is far more easier. No thank you. Therefore, firstly, incentive would solve everything. So their assumption itself is wrong. And moreover, no thank you. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, fundamentally, anyway, the Pakistan army has some reluctance to kill fellow Muslim or so forth. But, ladies and gentlemen, such a coercion, no thank you. Coercion is rather just strengthen their argument, but let me explain later as this question. And second of all, no thank you. They say that this plan would separate the terrorism and Muslim or so forth. But we think it's rather opposite. Ladies and gentlemen, for long, for example, former King of Fahd, Saudi Arabia explained that moderate Muslim and extreme Muslim is different. We are different from extremists. We are different from those who commit terrorism. But Islam actually says that all Pakistanis, regardless of their extreme or regardless of fundamentalists or so forth, still they are potential terrorists who would attack Saudi Arabia, ladies and gentlemen. It clearly shows, no thank you, that actually they are dismantling the distinction, moderate Muslim and extremist Muslim, ladies and gentlemen. And it causes huge harm, right? Ladies and gentlemen, in current situation, actually, unfortunately, as closing government said, Western people have tendency to see the Muslim as extremists, as potential terrorists or so forth. But by this thing is moderate Muslim and extreme Muslim. We, Muslim world, especially Saudi Arabia, tries to mediate such an antipathy or so forth. But ladies and gentlemen, by this proposal, actually we are saying not only the extremists, but also moderate Muslim living in Pakistan or so forth is still the potential terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that it is caused a lot of harm. For example, the antipathy in West would remain, and it would view the existence of terrorist organization. And moreover, such an anti-Muslim feeling in West would suppress the Muslim interest in world war so forth, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think it's important point. No, thank you. Okay, then let me move on to the first point session. No, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, well, we believe that Islam actually betrays Muslim itself, and which is called anger all around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said in introduction, Muslim is universal religion, and totally prohibits the discrimination or so forth upon the races or nationalities. For example, Sharia should be obeyed by all Muslims all around the world, and also the Muslims. Like Hajj or Um-rah is duty of Muslims all around the world, ladies and gentlemen, right? It's universal religion. But by this proposal, actually Saudi Arabian government is prohibiting certain amount of people to get such a universal right on the Muslim figure because of their self-interest of security. Ladies and gentlemen, and we believe that it is called other harms entire Muslim world, ladies and gentlemen. And why? Especially, let me think about the uniqueness of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was trusted as guardian of Mecca, not Mecca. Ladies and gentlemen, they protected Mecca for a long time, even during the Middle Eastern War, and support people to come into Mecca and provide good environment in Mecca. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, now many Muslim people are respecting Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is enjoying as a representative of Muslims and non-Muslims. But ladies and gentlemen, we take this proposal. Saudi Arabia would selfishly, by the self-interest, they would overturn such a duty to defend Mecca or something. Yeah.
If you say that religious freedom Thank you. If you say that religious freedom is so important and paramount, why not letting every single person who claims to be Muslim into Saudi Arabia? We're already discriminating against certain people in the status quo.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, yeah, some criminals themselves sometimes are discriminated, but ladies and gentlemen, fundamentally, we believe that we say that the generalization of people with extremism itself is unjust, ladies and gentlemen. And moreover, we believe that this fact that discriminating is cause a lot of harm. For example, well, there may be a lot of First of all, those countries who limit Muslims' rights, like Morocco or Egypt, there may be a lot of terrorism because many people would accuse the government itself because it limits terror. And this is the same. Saudi Arabian government would be targeted more and more by not only Al-Qaeda but also other Islamic states, Islamic agencies. And second of all, more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, Saudi Arabian citizens are Wahhab, who are really subordinate to Muslim belief, fundamental Muslim belief. Therefore, they use the Saudi Arabian action who are totally against Muslim belief, which is really unjust, ladies and gentlemen. They themselves, Saudi Arabian people themselves, would go against the Muslim government currently, and we believe that it would hinder the security by committing terrorism or we best to
majority of the arguments coming from the entire opposition base is predicated upon the assumption that we on the government is restricting or placing limitation upon the rights of the Muslim people. But that is not the case, Mr. Speaker. We are protecting the right of life, which is the most important thing and the foundation of right of religion, which the entire opposition case opposition base cares about. And furthermore, we are rather protecting the freedom of religion in some circumstances, and that's what we brought to you on the closing government. So based upon this, I'm going to examine two issues. Firstly, about the right of Muslim people in those Muslim wars, and secondly, about the effects upon the war on terror. So firstly, let's start with the right of Muslim people. Now, all you heard from the vast majority of the opening opposition's case is about how the Muslim people will be deprived of the right to religion, Mr. Speaker. But first of all, Mr. Speaker, the major failure with today's opening opposition is they never analyze this unique practice, Mr. Speaker, which is stipulated by the motion. They talk about this idea of generic, how the freedom of religion is important, which we all agree upon. That is not the question of this debate. Actually, they should talk about the specific practice which only mandates Muslim people to do once a life, right, Mr. Speaker? And that is why, if the entire government case, as in the entire government case told you, if we achieve a quick clean end toward the war on terror, then we are going to provide those people with a life to, for example, go to Mecca again. Mecca in life, right? And that is why their argument itself is not strictly relevant to this motion. But secondly, more importantly, in our extension, we provided to you specific reasons why we are rather not restricting but rather protecting the more important rights of Muslim people, right? For many reasons. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, we have to accept, even in the status quo, there are we accept some parts of the Muslim population we prevented from going to Mecca under our proposal. But we have to accept at the same time, almost the same number of people are prevented from exercising this right in the status quo, right? As my partner clearly told you, what is happening in those Afghanistan, Pakistan, is that there is ongoing conflict every single day, Mr. Speaker, and that is why many people are losing jobs, many people are losing their shelter, and many people are losing their safety and life, Mr. Speaker. That is how their right to go to, for example, Mecca, but their right to actually go to Mecca are prevented because they have no money which they can derive from their job. For example, they simply do not have state condition where they can access those holy places, and that is why we are, even if we accept that some people will not be able to go to places for permanently, Mr. Speaker. That is happening in the status quo for some people, and that's why that logic does not exclusively support the opposition case, given this fact. So but more importantly, we clearly told you how the right to life is threatened by this very conflict we are having right now, and to which the opposition never gave any credible alternative, right? Because we were having this conflict for the past decade. They never gave us any logic as to how they are going to improve the situation any better. We in the government clearly told you for the entire bench, as I'm going to further examine my next issue, we told you how at least the situation is going to get better, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, we are going to protect the right to life, which is the foundation of right to religion, as this specifically told you. But lastly, what we brought to you in our extension is that actually those very elements of Al-Qaeda is suppressing the people's right. Given the fact, Mr. Speaker, there are many different interpretations, there are many different views with regards to religions, but those, for example, Al-Qaeda are what is called fundamentalists, who understand what is written in Bible to the letter, right? So they enforce people to engage in practice to just like they are written in those, for example, holy texts, right? And that is why the more liberal people's right to practice at a daily basis, Mr. Speaker. We are not talking about not only talking about practice which happens once a life. We are also talking about the people whose daily practice is suppressed by those fundamental and more conservative interpretations which are taken by Al-Qaeda, Mr. Speaker. And that is for those comprehensive reasons. Firstly, even in terms of freedom of religion, we are rather protecting, we are not depriving those rights, but secondly, we are protecting more important rights, and that's why we take this issue. So what we heard from the closing opposition in their extension is that, firstly, Mr. Speaker, with regards to South Arabia is regarded as the guardian of Muslims. Oh, that is true. That is also the reason why, even under our proposal, we don't think Saudi Arabia will lose its credibility as a guardian of Muslim population, because obviously Saudi Arabia will still maintain its, for example, rather conservative policy even in comparison with other Islamic countries, and furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the closing of talks about how the Saudi Arabia will be more vulnerable to the attacks by the Muslim population under our proposal. But that is not the case. It is actually prohibited by their own law and in their own values for the Islamic people to attack other Islamic people, right? The reason why they engage in war in some cases is because they have like clash of civilization, right? But they never attack the Islam people, especially the most conservative and pious people in Saudi Arabia, and that is why the extension itself does not stand. Furthermore, we told you Saudi Arabia is not taking this policy in order to suppress the rights of Muslim people, rather they are undertaking this policy in order to protect these people's rights, and that is the fundamental basis which is missed in today's debate. I'll take opening here.
It was not our burden to solve the conflict with decades, and we've told you how your policy makes the situation worse. The last question I'd like to ask, why are you willing to protect 2 or 3% of people's rights to life or rights to religion and sacrifice the vast majority of people living in Pakistan?
Yes, only 2 or 3% of the people's life is threatened in those countries, right? Like we're having this serious issue, a lot of people's life are threatened, and as for the practicality, like with regards to war on terror, that's what I'm going to examine from now on. So moving on to the second issue of this debate, which is about the effects of war on terror. Now, what we heard from the opening opposition is that, as I already flagged, we don't think like they are, for example, cracking down, which has continued for the last decade, but we haven't got single man for living very close to Saudi Arabian government for the past decade, right? But right after CIA, American government undertaking this black operation, we have like Osama bin Laden, right? That clearly shows how the cooperation we are having right now is something fragile. Now we told you from the closing that we added to the opening government logic as to how we are going to push the government for policy. We added from the closing government. Now in response to this, we heard from the closing opposition how, Mr. Speaker, there will it is a matter of capacity, not the incentive. But we gave you how the capacity will be reinforced by taking a proposal, right? Because we are going to reduce the membership of those, like Al-Qaeda, right? Because obviously the reason that Al-Qaeda is gathering members by using the rhetoric that actually the West is the enemy. But right now, the reason why people cannot practice their freedom of religion is because of the existence of Al-Qaeda base in their own countries, right? That will directly change the calculus of Muslim people. Now Al-Qaeda is the one which is preventing them from exercising the most important right of religion, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are going to cut the tie between tribe and Al-Qaeda, which the opening opposition talks about. That's how we are going to reduce the membership. We are going to reduce the amount that we're going from civilians to Al-Qaeda. And furthermore, we are going to have more cooperation and provision of intelligence from the people on the ground toward the Western countries. That's what we are going to improve it. Now, we are not going to associate those Muslim people with potential terrorists. We are protecting these people's rights. We never said we are going to undermine these people's rights. Rather, we are protecting these people's rights. On those grounds, we are extremely proud to propose.
Arabia is the symbol of Muslim. It provides this Mecca, which is a very important symbol for the Islamic believer. And this is why we believe that prohibiting those people to go into Mecca simply will just create antipathy from those Muslim people for the Saudi Arabia. This is why we're proud to oppose. So basically, I'll talk about 2 things. First, within today's government model is count work to tackle the Al-Qaeda base in Pakistan or Afghanistan and so forth. And secondly, we'll talk about what is the consequence and whether this will encourage a terrorist movement, especially targeted to Saudi Arabia. Because we believe it's especially important, we are talking about whether Saudi Arabian government should do, I will talk about one by one. So first about the issue of tackling to the Al-Qaeda base. Well, basically today's opening government came up with this idea, well, government fears a protest from the domestic citizens, so they will make effort. Okay, but the problem here is that they're already making effort, but unfortunately they're not capable to crack down those Afghanistan base. Well, Osama bin Laden was living near the government palace, but it just shows how Osama bin Laden was controlling the local residents. And beyond the closing, my partner clearly explained to you that, well, what is the consequence? Well, when the government is not capable, and it is Saudi Arabia which is prohibiting those Muslims from going to the Mecca. So the government can easily make an excuse and say to the citizens that, I'm sorry, we have been tackling this problem so much, but well, because we are not capable enough, we can't do it. But it is those Saudi Arabian who are prohibiting from you to going to the Mecca. And because those citizens really know that situation, we don't think that people living in Somalia think that their government is functioning enough to tackle the problem of Afghanistan base. And therefore the consequence is quite easy to imagine those people just target those hatred to the Saudi Arabian government and because those Pakistan, Afghanistan government can just bring this Afghanistan out of Saudi Arabia. We don't think there will be a change and by this model. And then the closing government came up with this idea that okay, local residents will stop supporting Al-Qaeda. Okay, but the problem here is that already Ryotaro and Tominaga that those local residents are already brainwashed and their freedom of religion is restricted. So it is very easy for Al-Qaeda to say that your freedom of religion is restricted because of the selfish action of Saudi Arabia acting for the Western nation. So we don't think that there will be a cut in support. Rather, it will be a good means for the propaganda for the terrorist group to say that though Saudi Arabia should be the one to be targeted. And this is why closing.
Simple question: which is easier for these citizens? Citizens trying to overturn Saudi government or saying no to Al-Qaeda?
Okay, it is a very good question. If the citizen can act rationally, but unfortunately we are already under control of Al-Qaeda. That is very sad. Issue about whether this will encourage terrorist movement. Well, my partner did explain how Saudi Arabia protected Mecca for a long time. It is not about the domestic issue. And Quran clearly states that the Muslims have to visit Mecca. It is their duty, and it is their duty. So just prohibiting people going into Mecca is not just the domestic policy of Saudi Arabia. It just shows that how Saudi Arabia is not fulfilling their duty as a Muslim country, which is extremely important when we think about how visiting Mecca is valuable for those Muslims. And I think that the opposition did a very good job explaining why it is religion. But we believe that it is not the only issue about people living in Pakistan or Afghanistan, which was stated by the opening opposition. But partner clearly explained to you that it is the problem of the whole Muslim society. As long as those Muslims respect this teaching of Sharia and Quran so much, for those people, Saudi Arabia are the ones who are violating the freedom of religion of the Muslim, which those people cannot really stand. Well, the response coming from Tominaga was, Muslims do not attack Muslims, so people will not attack Saudi Arabia. But it's very strange analysis because already we have seen ton of cases. I'm sorry. Muslims are attacked by the own Muslim, and Morocco, the government was merely tempted because in jihad it tells that if there are Muslims who are believing in different way, which is not accepted. It just says that jihad is an acceptable way to attack. And this is what we believe that the simple consequence who won't be able to visit Mecca, but from the whole entire Muslim society. And we believe that this is not totally benefit for Saudi Arabia, which is the main actor in this debate. Because as long as there will be more hatred coming to the country, there will be more people sacrificed by terrorist attacks, more people's lives will be destroyed, and we don't think that is what Saudi Arabian government, which needs to protect their own citizens, should do. And this is why we believe that there is clear reason to oppose this motion, thereby repel the vote. Thank you.